Hey guys, I'm Dav, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. Today we're back with the lovable goblins. Yes indeed, as you can see from our deployment, we've gone with a full-on goblin vanguard force. We're fighting the dwarfs on one of the new maps that was released in the latest patch. So let's go ahead and quickly take a look at the army composition before the game gets underway. We've got a main line of Night Goblins with Fanatics. The two regiments renowned are going to be mixed in, the Warlord's Boys and the AP Loonies. On the flanks, we've got two Nasty Skulkers on each flank. We've also got two Night Goblin Squig Hoppers out on each flank. One of them is the Durkit Squigs Regiment of Renown. We've got the T-Frabas Regiment of Renown Goblin Wolf Chariots. We've got a Gobbo firing squad here with the Rusty Arrows and two Night Goblin Archers. We've also got the Morgrove's Mangy Marauders AP Regiment of Renown Goblin Wolf Riders. We've also got the Moon Howlers out in the far corner to chase down routing units. For the dwarves, they're going to be led by Thorgrim Grudgebearer. We've got dwarf warriors up front. We've got a master engineer, a couple of artillery pieces, Goblobber and Bolt Thrower. We've also got some correlers with great weapons, which is an interesting choice. Yeah, so without further ado, let's kick the battle into full gear. You can see there's some Ekron's Miners here. Ekron's Miners are actually a pretty decent regiment of renown. They have good AP and solid combat stats, and for their cost, actually are a pretty decent unit, but they are going to get caught a little bit out of position here, potentially. I mean, there's just an absolute horde of goblins storming up the hills, so I mean, obviously, us deploying so close is going to negate somewhat my opponent's artillery advantage. You can see his artillery actually reaches all the way out to here, whereas we just started straight in the pipe. But yeah, we're going to get the first bit going here with these Squig Hoppers. It was a little bit late on popping that WAAAAGH, but we're going to get that going shortly. And I love the new WAAAAGH mechanic, by the way, that map-wide kind of timing push. We're going to get that charge bonus going off and additional speed to help these gobbos push up the hill, get in the main line fight. You can see these Nasty Skulkers up to 24 charge bonus. We've also got the Alpha Strike coming in the back line with all these Squig Hoppers and Chariots. Just going to go straight into these Correlers, and these guys are definitely going to wish they had brought shields for the additional melee defense, because they are just going to get absolutely munched on by hordes of Squigs and Goblins. We've got the T-Frabas in here, pulling teeth, doing their dentistry thing. Moon Howler's also going to come in to start interrupting some units, and yeah, we're going to drop that Itchy Nuisance here in the center, just to help these Nasty Skulkers and Night Goblins win out. Night Goblins with Fanatics, especially if you get a good cast of the Fanatics, they can do a lot of damage, can be very, very devastating. But yeah, just taking an overarching look here, Thorgrim's going to actually go after the Goblin Shaman. We are going to get some casts of some Fanatics going down the line here, getting in, doing a little bit of friendly fire, but doing some really nice work to the dwarves as well. More Fanatics up on top of the hill. These are the actual AP Loonies, and yeah, doing quite a bit of friendly fire there, but probably actually wasn't worth it in the end. But we do have plenty of supporting elements still on station. The back line has just been completely collapsed by overwhelming amounts of gobbos, these Squig Hoppers. Very cost-effective unit in this matchup, and I do think this is one of the tougher matchups for the dwarves, just because the greenskins have such a wide variety of what they can bring, and builds like this are totally viable against the dwarves. I mean, we were able to catch my opponent off guard. My Goblin Great Shaman mismicroed him a little bit, got him beat up, but we used the Crown of Command that he had to make him unbreakable, just to get one more cast. We got a nice Curse the Bad Moon, which you might have seen just now up here, but he only has 80 health left, so he's going to shatter. But despite the lack of leadership, I mean, we've just taken down the dwarves so hard, and all their ranged units are running for the hills. There's just a few pockets of resistance holding out in the front line, a few dwarf warriors, that master engineer. Thorgrim is getting turned into an absolute pincushion by the Night Goblin Archers, and definitely regretting coming this far to face these goblins. But, you know, grudges must be satisfied, but it seems that new ones will be written today instead. Yeah, very fun stuff. I do think that this build is somewhat viable against the dwarfs, especially if your opponent's not expecting it. You can actually see I'm fighting under the Bloody Hands banner, so the reason why I do that is just maybe, you know, obviously Bloody Hands can do this. They have access to all the Goblin units on their roster, but maybe, you know, your opponent might get confused and think that you're going to bring a Savage Orc build, where instead you whip out this full Goblin rush, and it's just absolutely devastating. You can see a lot of dwarf units starting to shatter at this point. Thorgrim's still online. We've got him in here fighting the AP Loonies. They're unbreakable, so they're happy to fight to the end here, and they don't mind getting friendly fired here quite a bit, as goblins are not particularly known for their accuracy. And although Thorgrim's a pretty large target, he's not not that large of a target. So on a side note, I really like the Master Engineers. I've been using them a little bit, and they seem to be much more accurate and are actually a pretty decent choice now. I find supporting artillery. You can have them supporting like Bugman's Rangers if they're shooting at a big monstrous lord or hero, or or just a monster. It can do a lot of damage. I really like the Dwarven Engineer now, and I'm going to be showing him off in a couple of replays coming forward. But yeah, at this point, just Thorgrim holding out. The rest of the dwarf force is mostly shattered, being chased off by squigs, wolf riders. He has managed to deal with most of my goblins, but at that point, Thorgrim and the other engineer giving up the fight, deciding they want to go back to their hold. So very fun stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. It was a super fun battle to play, and like I said, I think that this all Gobbo Vanguard thing is relatively viable against the dwarves, just because they don't really, they tend to sit back with artillery and use their ranged power, so if you can negate that, it can definitely be helpful. I would caution against using this against a faction like the Empire. It could work, especially if your opponent's not prepared for it, but against the faction that has some pretty good gooning power, this Gobbo Great Shaman is an extremely squishy character. I mean, I mismicroed him. I could have easily escaped from Thorgrim if I had been paying attention, but I mismicroed him just for a few seconds, and he got just beaten by Thorgrim Grudgebearer there. So definitely a very squishy character. You have to be careful with him. So against a faction like the Empire or other factions with strong flying units, heavy cavalry, and gooning power, may not be the best pick, but it's definitely a fun pick, and certainly if your opponent's not expecting it, you just Insta-WAAAAGH, pop that WAAAAGH right off and just charge straight in like a true Gobbo would. In terms of the breakdown, I mean, 59 kills on Goblin Fanatics is quite decent. You can see these guys were all juiced up with chevrons before the battle, so 48 and 55 on Nasty Skulkers. They did very well. The Gobbo firing squad, obviously, helping take down Thorgrim was pretty key. But really, the MVPs were the Squigs, just running roughshod over that back line. 87 and 69, 22, 54. Mangy Marauders themselves getting 69 and 36 on the T-Brabos, not too bad. 35 on the Moonhowlers, chasing down mostly routing units. For my opponent, just the Slayers actually did quite well. 92 kills. I don't know if those XP chevrons were doled out before the battle, but they were the lone bright spot. Thorgrim himself getting a hold of the Goblin Great Shaman was a great catch. Sloppy on my part, but very nicely played by my opponent, taking advantage of that mistake. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't quite enough. There's overwhelming amounts of goblins. I have used this build against some other factions. Chaos can be tricky because you don't really have the best answers for dealing with large armored units, and that's kind of the main weakness of this list. And Goblin lists in general is that the Greenskins tend to have an issue with anti-large, and Goblins don't have any anti-large units whatsoever. There's no Goblin unit that has anti-large, so really the only anti-large you're going to get in a full Goblin build is, well, I guess Skarsnik has anti-large, but Skarsnik is just a terrible character. I'll come back to Skarsnik on another day. I'm going to be having a discussion about Skarsnik, Grimgore, and some of the other changes I'd like to see to the Greenskins, but besides Skarsnik, there's no Goblin unit that has a bonus versus large. So dealing with big monsters can be tricky. I mean, obviously you can take a very heavy missile presence and try and go that way. It can work. It can be tricky to protect your missiles, though, particularly when your front line is just goblins and they tend to rout off quite often. So against some of the higher tier factions, I would say in terms of like monsters and heavy cavalry and things like that, this build probably wouldn't work. But who knows, with some modifications it could maybe even be made to work against the Skaven if we were to cut down on the Skulkers and just bring more Night Goblins maybe. Just deploy right in the Skaven's face and just run at them. Maybe Durkit Squigs might be a good choice, or maybe you go for something cheaper and just juice them up with some chevrons. But yeah, overall, very fun stuff. I do quite like where the new WAAAAGH mechanic is at. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to be showing some more battles upcoming within the next couple weeks, showcasing it. And yeah, it's definitely been a lot of fun. For my opponent's build, I mean, obviously, Dwarfs versus Greenskins is rough, and it can be very tricky to game plan for. I just automatically selected Kedrin because I love this color scheme, but if we go to the actual Dwarfs here, Thorgrim's a pretty solid pick. He has some nice buffs, but I mean, obviously, my opponent had invested pretty heavily in his missile capability in that match with the Goblobber and that Bolt Thrower and so on. And Corridors with Great Weapons are another odd pick as well. I mean, you really wouldn't want these guys fighting something like Black Orcs unless you really had to. And I mean, I guess with Thorgrim's buffs, they might not do terribly, but yeah, it's definitely not going to be super cost effective. So, what would I do instead? I'd probably honestly go with some Bugman's Rangers. Just go with some mass Bugman's Rangers. These guys are quite a cost-effective pick against the Greenskins. They can fight in melee against most Greenskin infantry, you know, below, say, like, Biggins. I'm not sure about Savage Orcs. They might get beaten by them, but they do some nice damage to all the unarmored units at range. Really the only armored units you have to worry about on the Greenskins roster are the the Ragnarok and the Black Orcs, so you can take a mostly non-AP force with just a few key AP units, and you should be okay. Ungrim Iron Fist is a pretty good pick. I've been using him quite a bit lately, and he is a great character. You can get his weapon strength up very, very high if you stack these 3 buffs here, this Deadly Onslaught, Red Ruin, and Axe of Dargo. Obviously, it doesn't have as many buffs, but he is more of a world beater, and he can get in there and definitely deal with some things. But in that battle, I don't know that he would have helped that much. It honestly probably would have been best to just go with a really cheap Dwarf Lord here, something like this. And, ooh, that Star Metal Plate. Disabled if leadership is lower than 50%. That might be a decent, that Perfect Vigor might be decent as well. So those 2 items are a consideration, but I think honestly you just go super wide, with the exception of a few key elite units. So something like this, and this is pretty similar to what my opponent had. I mean, obviously on that particular map, I probably would recommend against artillery just because it has so many hills and terrain features that it can be easy to outmaneuver the artillery's arc of fire, especially if it's a cannon-type artillery. Goblobber might not be a terrible pick, although it's going to be tricky to protect these backline units, and we've already invested so much in these Bugman's Rangers. So we'll probably just grab some Dragonvac Slayers. Giant Slayers, again, you're really only going to be facing perhaps an Ragnarok Queen, so I don't really think you need Giant Slayers necessarily. Norgrimling's Ironbreakers will be a great anchor unit. Maybe we tank up on some more Longbeards just to make a more meaty front line. And then, who knows, maybe we grab some Gyrocopters for some harass as well. We've gone a little bit over here, so we'd have to cut something down. But something like this could be pretty decent. The Engineer is also a good pick for a character if you want to support. Great for artillery maps, and that map was a little bit rough because, again, he didn't have the best lines of sight, but yeah, can be a very useful character. Pretty cost-effective. I usually cut this entrenchment, although it can be a decent ability. Plus 40% armor-piercing missile damage. Maybe not, but yeah, I mean, you can cut him down to make him relatively cheap, make him more of like an assassin type, or if you get this extra powder and so on, if you to get more explosion. This is mainly focused for artillery, but armor-piercing explosion as well. Or, you know, you can make them a little bit more expensive with some other support capabilities, Prospector's Eyeglass. If you don't have any artillery, like for this build, I'd probably cut extra powder, keep ballistics calibration. Entrenchment, I might cut that as well, just to make them a bit cheaper. Maybe take the Prospector's Spyglass. Fire Ring of Thori could be a decent one in this matchup as well. That's like, it's the same item that many different dwarf characters have had. It's kind of moved around over the years. And at this point, it's still the same as it pretty much always has been. Aimable breath attack, fire and magic damage, pretty decent overall, especially against lower armor factions. But this is just kind of some theory crafting, just kind of my thoughts on how you might counter a super fast Gobbo rush like that. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Did you enjoy that all Gobbo Vanguard, the Insta-WAAAAGH as I've taken to calling it? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. And yeah, we'll see you next time.